Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this panel of the Second International Conference on Policy Diffusion and Development Cooperation. This is the panel number 3, Capacity to Transfer the Role of Individuals, Organizations, and Systems on the Adoption and Internationalization of Public Policies. This panel is organized by Natalia Koga from IPEA and myself. I would just like to share with you the dynamics of this panel and say a few words about why it all started. So the dynamics of the panel, we're going to have two presentations, a presentation from Anna Malandrino from the University of Bologna, called Transnational Networks and the Domestic, Social and Labor Policy Cycle in the European Union, a case study, and a presentation by Lionel Arnaud and his collaborators, the dissemination and implementation of cultural rights worldwide, from insurrectional actors to program actors, a comparison of Brazilian, French, and South African cases. They both are going to have around 15 minutes to present, and then I'm going to make comments of their papers, and we can also receive questions from the audience. So please, if you have any questions, write down in the YouTube chat. We're going to receive here, and then we are going to share these questions with the authors. Just a few words about this panel before starting with Anna's presentation. We started to think about this issue, policy capacity and policy transfer, a few years ago. Actually, it was during the first conference, International Conference of Policy on Policy Diffusion and Development Cooperation, held in São Paulo, and the following workshop that we organized on this topic at the Brazilian National School of Public Administration, when Natalia and myself started discussing about the topic of policy capacity and the capacity to transfer, as this was something that we thought was very important for us to understand policy transfer, but it was not yet explored in depth. And we started talking about this and discussing, and we thought that in this conference it would have been interesting to propose a panel about this, and to see what we would get from the different scholars around the world. It was very interesting because we had so many diverse papers. As you can see in the program, we were able to put together 3 sessions of this panel. All the 3 sessions are going to take place today. So this is the first one. The second one is going to be right after this one at 1:30 p.m. GMT. And then the last session is going to be also today at 10 p.m. GMT until midnight. We had to put this session at this time because we have a participant that is coming from Indonesia, so we had to make the time fit for everyone to participate. So we have a participant from Brazil and another one from Indonesia. So everything is going to be recorded here and available on YouTube. Also, I'm going to discuss, me and Natalia, we're going to discuss more about the theoretical elements that we thought for this panel in our presentation that is going to be in the next panel. So I won't go deeper in this discussion now. And that's it. Just practical information. It would be very important for us if you like the channel and activate the notifications so you can receive all the information of the panels of this conference. And thanks for being here with us today and watching this panel and this video. And with no further comments, I would like to give the word to Anna Malandrino from the University of Bologna, who is going to be the first person to present today. So Anna, if you are ready, we can start with you.
Can you see my presentation? Can you see my presentation? All right, great. So thank you for having me at this conference. And I'm Anna Malandrino. I'm a postdoctoral scholar at the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the University of Bologna. And today I will present a study about transnational networks and their potential impact on the domestic social and labor policy cycle in the European Union. So the goal of this paper comes from the very context of transnational cooperation in the European Union, and also from the fact that social and labor policies are not devolved, as you know, to the supranational level of governance in the European Union. So member states are responsible for adopting their own social and labor policies. So the goal of this paper is to assess the potential impact of transnational networks, especially transnational networks set up for mutual learning, best practice exchange, and the impact of the transnational network will be assessed on the domestic public policy cycle, especially trying to identify what kind of impact, how this impact can materialize or does materialize, and why. So, as I said, the institutional context is very important when talking about transnational cooperation in the European Union. In fact, transnational cooperation is a key tool for the EU cohesion policy, and this particular network, which is called Employment Thematic Network, and I will present it in a minute, is especially funded by the European Social Fund, whose goals are employment and labor mobility, but also the promotion of social inclusion, learning and capacity building. A few methodological premises to this study are also useful because I decided to focus on the meetings of the network that I examined as focal points of network activity, in the words of Paulo and Spence 2020. And another methodological premise of my study stems from data transparency. So this study was made possible by the fact that in the institutional framework of the European Union, data are often made available publicly. And in particular, the data that I used, that I employed in this study, were available on the European Commission website about transnationality when I conducted the study. So let's come to the theoretical framework, which is basically made up of three institutionalist explanations: sociological institutionalism, rational choice institutionalism, and discursive institutionalism. So you might see that historical institutionalism is missing because I thought that I assumed at the beginning of the study that and knowing a little bit of transnational cooperation, these particular explanations are more appropriate in the context of this case study. So sociological institutionalism, as you know, assumes that norms, and in this case EU norms, intended not only as rules, legal rules, but norms and principles more generally, are internalized by the actors, by decision-making actors, when they make decisions. While rational choice institutionalism assumes that norms create opportunities for actors that respond to them strategically. And finally, discursive institutionalism actually builds upon both sociological and rational choice institutionalism, but emphasizes the role, the power of ideas in their context, so in discourse. The research design of this study is, as I said, based on a case study whose subject is the employment thematic network, which has the aim of deals with employment and social inclusion, and it does so by promoting internal mutual learning between the members of the network, which are labor and social policy ministries, public employment services, trade unions, non-governmental organizations, training institutions, private companies, and also experts invited from time to time, depending on the subject of discussion, to the workshops. This mutual learning is basically concretized by means of specific activities, which are workshops, study visits, peer reviews of project progress, in which the members of the network exchange their experiences concerning projects funded usually by the European Social Fund. And also resource development is a key activity of the network. As for the investigation tools that I used document analysis of a qualitative nature on a set of 325 files, including meeting minutes, primarily meeting minutes, but also presentations and preliminary readings that were circulated before the meetings of the network. And I complemented this document analysis with semi-structured interviews with 5 key informants who were all members of the employment thematic network in various guises. Okay, so these are the results of the study. I basically identify the ETN output in relation to each of the phases of the public policy cycle, and also the prevalent explanations that apply to the potential impact of these activities, of this output on the domestic public policy cycle. So in terms of agenda setting, the activities were the identification of new challenges, goals, and worldviews, especially during the meetings, and also the highlighting of a possible spillover between and within policy areas. So policies, projects that were implemented in certain policy areas. For example, social inclusion could be used for the purpose of improving policies in other areas. In terms of formulation and adoption, and I put them together because at this stage we cannot really distinguish them. The considerations that are inherent in adoption are actually also related to formulation, because formulation is thought, is conceived in view of the adoption of certain measures. So regarding these 2 phases, there was an identification of new measures that member states can adopt and this identification took place during the meetings as well. But also the identification of implementation issues, problems in the implementation of certain measures that can be anticipated in the formulation phase through specific formulation devices. And importantly, the identification of funding opportunities, because European Commission members participated sometimes in these meetings and basically provided insights about future funding opportunities to which the member states, the actors from member states can respond strategically. As for the implementation phase, there was an identification of the implementing actors' preferences, but also an exchange of practical information about problems regarding the implementation issues that I anticipated in the previous with regard to the previous phase, and the identification of new solutions to these issues. Also, the identification of implementation obstacles and tools employed to overcome them overall was a key key output of this regarding this phase. Finally, with regard to the evaluation phase, there was during meetings an identification of relationships between policy design and possibly undesirable outcomes. So this basically can be a prompt for changing the formulation of future policies, and also the identification of policy results in the long run to be considered in other countries, for example, as benchmarks. And finally, the elaboration of indicators that was actually an outcome that was observed in some member states in particular. So all of these outputs can impact on the public policy cycle, are likely to impact on public policy cycle according to different explanations. As you can see, we always have discursive institutionalism, which is transversal in a way. But depending on the public policy cycle phase, we also have different explanations in terms of sociological institutionalism for agenda setting and evaluation, and rational choice institutionalism for formulation and implementation. So what are the conclusions of this study? That impact occurs to a different extent in different policy cycle stages and regarding these policy cycle stages, according to dynamics that can be explained by the three types of institutionalism that I mentioned before: sociological, rational choice, and discursive. I also deemed to be important to identify obstacles to cooperation, because since cooperation, transnational mutual learning, and networking can be useful for changing, for bringing about change into the public policy cycle of member states, of European Union member states, it is also important to identify what can hamper this cooperation. And I identified two categories of obstacles. Obstacles within cooperation, including weak commitment of member states to a more structured cooperation, for example, through coordinated costs, which weren't fully exploited, but also the accessibility of best practice information. So these data, as I said, that I used in the study were available on the website of the European Commission, but when trying to find further information about the projects that were discussed during these meetings, I found difficulties because some websites weren't in English, they were in the local language of the specific member state. And so this from the point of view of dissemination of the results of cooperation and mutual learning can be a problem. Also, there's no mechanism for long-term feedback in the employment thematic network. So we aren't really able at the moment to assess the actual impact that these activities can have on the long term. There's an insufficient degree of dissemination according to some of the members of the network, and also a scope that by some members of the network is considered too broad, in the sense that it covers too many policy issues, and this can be an obstacle to full exploitation of the mutual learning benefits that can stem from this cooperation. As for the obstacles to cooperation, so we mean external obstacles, we have cultural differences between member states, but also structural differences, intra-organizational deficiencies in inter-organizational context, which is known as the structural dilemma, in the words of Birdsell, 1998. And in this case, we're talking about the problems that in terms of time, in terms of other activities to carry out, these problems are problems inherent in the organizations that participated in this network, in this transnational network, and they can impact, of course, the cooperation itself. Okay, so I think I've told you the most important elements of my study, and of course I'm open to any questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Anna, for for your presentation. I read the paper and I liked it a lot, and it was much more clear seeing your presentation and hearing you now. My comments are going to be both on the paper, on the written form of the paper, and your presentation. So I think this is a very interesting topic that you are working here. The role of transnational networks in public policy making. By the way, there is a full panel on networks methodology in this conference, organized by Chris Walker and Alex Mullis. There you probably are going to find also very interesting information and insights for your work. So I have two major comments and then a few small observations. So the thing that I found it very interesting how you accessed the data and how you showed you described the networks and their impact on the different stages of the agenda. I think this is one of the strengths of the work. So the fact that you used a lot of data and also described in depth these networks. I'm going to go to the end of your presentation because I found it very, very interesting, your findings on the obstacles. And I think that this is something that is still missing on policy transfer literature. That is, what are the elements, the forces, the mechanisms that are constraining public policies to be implemented? And you in your work you have gone very deep in this microdynamics by observing, and I found this really interesting in your presentation, the obstacles within cooperation and to cooperation. I think this is something that also is can dialogue with our paper that's going be presented in the next session. So these are the very positive aspects that I liked in your paper. I have two observations, as I mentioned before. First one is that I really missed, and also in your presentation, I missed the networks in action. So how are they really influencing in the process of agenda setting or implementation, and so on and so on? I missed a sort of vignette, a sort of moment that you captured this transnational networks operating. And I think that this would be very interesting for you to present to us. So how are these like? Because there are different studies on the role of think tanks, for example, in the Europeanization processes, as the work of Stella Leidy, other works on epistemic communities, and so on and so on. And I really wanted to understand how these transnational networks you are observing are different, and how they operate in a daily basis, or what is crucial for them to set an idea on the agenda, or to have a success in the implementation stage, and so on and so on. I think this is an observation associated to this first one. Maybe your attempt was too broad. That is, you were trying to cover different stages of the policy cycle, and you couldn't go deep enough into this more micro dynamics of the transnational networks operation. So maybe this is it. Something that I also found in your paper is that you take a long time describing and this research design and your theoretical framework and so on, and you arrive only in the findings in page 11. And I think it was too late to get to the more empirical material in your paper, but this is just a minor observation. The second element is that I felt a little bit uncomfortable, but maybe this is only my perception of the uses that you were making with different analytical categories. So you were using a very, let's say, a more sociological category, which was the idea of this horizontal, voluntary, reciprocal networks. The object that you were analyzing, you adopt the notion of Keke thinking, if I'm not wrong, of transnational networks. And in your paper, at a certain point, you also mentioned epistemic communities, and this made me a little bit confused. I didn't know if you wanted to use one or the other category, but you are, in general, you are observing this object, this political object, through a very sociological lens of analysis, the networks, which has a sort of a more fluid action, and you, on the other hand, are observing a very stylized definition of public policy making, which is the policy cycle. And the policy cycle, it's a very useful tool for us in classes, and also for us to start understanding public policy making. But it has been a lot criticized by, as being an artificial construction in order to present public policy making. It has been criticized of being rational, linear, when we have public policies made by one step after the other. And in practice, what we observe is that this process of agenda setting, formulation, and decision making, implementation can be overlapped. So I was wondering how this combination made impacted your narrative. So I don't know. I wanted just for you to reflect on these two elements, analytical elements that you brought together. That I thought I felt a little bit uncomfortable with this. And the other element associated to your analytical tools is the use of a rational choice institutionalism. When I think about rational choice institutionalism, I have in mind, but maybe this is a personal reading, I have in mind a lot of discussion about game theory and the measure of costs and benefits from the agents and so on and so on. And when I read your paper and I heard your presentation now, I'm not sure if this was in your analysis of if this was your intention. So I wanted to understand a little bit better what is the type of rational choice that you are using here. And yes, that's it. The other minor observation is that if I'm not wrong, there was no analysis on the decision making process. So when you showed your PowerPoint, you had agenda setting, formulation, and then we jumped to implementation and evaluation. And usually we have another stage, which is decision making. And I wanted to know if you found any impact of transnational networks on this. Some elements that I think it would be interesting to observe or to include in the paper. And the first is the literature or examples about other transnational networks in the European Union. So I wanted I was very curious about learning more about this the broader class of empirical objects that you were analyzing. And I thought of one network, a transnational network that I know that was sponsored by the European Union, which was the Urbal network. I think it doesn't exist anymore, but it was very strong in the 90s and especially in the early 2000s. It was these were networks of cities between in Latin America and the European Union that had the object of fostering cooperation and exchange of knowledge on urban management between cities in Europe and Latin America. And this was a sort of type of network that is this sponsored network from the European Union in order to produce some type of public policy effect. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about this class of objects. What are they? How many are there in European Union? Is this a common strategy of European Union to bring in to foster the regional cooperation or cooperation in specific sectors as labor or I don't know, maybe environment, and so on and so on. There is also a difference maybe between the transnational networks that CAC and SICINC are looking to and your network, because you are dealing with, if I'm not wrong, funded and targeted networks. So I think these networks, they rely on a sort of institutional dependency from the funds of the European Union, and for how long these topics are on the European Union agenda. Meanwhile, the Seeking a CAC networks are networks of NGOs or social movements that are relied on a basis of defending a particular right or a particular agenda, and are more close to what Lionel is discussing in even if he doesn't work with transnational networks, but the sort of object that Lionel is dealing in his presentation. And a question that could raise on this is the life cycle of your type of network. Is this a network that is that has the destiny to end after maybe 4 years, 2 years, as long as European Union keeps funding, or after the funding ends, there is enough energy and a group that can convert this sponsored network into a more independent network that will gather its own fundraising measures. And yes, I think this is and the other element I found it's very interesting from your presentation. I think it's in page 10. You mentioned that they are all like the same or something like this, and why I was thinking on the isomorphic nature of these networks. That is something that you could explore or give us more details. I think yes, it's in page 10 that you discuss something about this, or the meetings that have all the same structure, and so on and so on. So yes, these are my main comments. Of course, I wanted to offer you the best of my reading of your paper, which I enjoyed a lot, and part of my comments are beyond the scope of your paper. So it's maybe for you to think later, or in other projects, or so on and so on. So yes, that's it from my part. Natalia also wanted to make some comments, and so before inviting Anna to reply to these comments, or say anything, I would invite Natalia to join us to present her comments. And I would also invite people from the audience, if you have any question that you want to make to Anna, please write on the YouTube chat. So that's it. Thank you very much. Natalia, you can jump in.
Hi guys, Anna and Osmani, thank you very much. Actually, I was very excited also to hear Osmani's comments, and I believe that my presence here has much to do with the capacity debate. And I would like just to make two comments on, and actually questions to Anna, looking through these lenses of the capacity. And when you discussed the network main goals, one of them was building capacity, yes? And I was wondering, when you started to identify the outputs of the network, some of them, in my perspective, are really related to capacities. For instance, you've mentioned that are different institutional degrees of abilities, of skills between the members of the network, as well as you discuss that were organizational deficiencies. And I was wondering if it's not actually a result of a failure of the network in terms of wow, if one of the objects on the goals of some of the goals of the network was precisely to build capacity amongst members, if it was not being able to achieve, was actually not it's a non-accomplished result of the network initiative. Or whether we can think about capacity in terms of, wow, what kind of capacity are necessary to be part of this kind of network, yeah? So, and in the sense, has some relation to the final comments that Osmani made. You, in the beginning of your paper, you call attention to the fact that you are going to examine a thematic network, yeah? And I thought, well, wow, so what was special in terms of the outcomes of this kind of network? The fact of all of them, all the actors are being joined because of this theme makes any difference in the outcomes. And maybe it's not possible to look at this question through one case study, but maybe it's another question that you can make in future researchers when you look to different cases in comparison cases. But well, thank you very much. It was very exciting for our first paper in this panel, and I appreciate if you could reply to all questions. I'm just gonna add here, just checking if we have any questions from the audience or the participants of the panel. But well, we are fine, and we can hand over to Anna for her comments. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Osmani and Natalia. I will start by replying to Osmani's comments. So in terms of, you said that you missed the networks in action. So there's a point missing in my paper because it's not basically part of the scope of the paper, and it's how actually the actors involved in the network participate later in the public policy cycle, because the paper focuses on the potential impact of the activities of the network. So it focuses on the activities of the network, which are exemplified in the paper. I did not have much time to present them during the presentation because they are a lot. I just summarized their types in the table, basically. If by networks in action you mean how the members of this employment thematic network actually operated inside their public policy cycles in their member states, it was not part of the scope of the paper, and partly, I don't know how, to what extent it could be actually researched, because as I mentioned when I was talking about the obstacles, we miss a long-term feedback mechanism for this kind of network, which has expired, so it's not operating anymore. It was a fixed-term network. Okay, so I hope I have answered your comment, your first comment. As for the theoretical framework before arriving to empirics, that was basically to give a background, but I do agree that more space should be given to empirics, provided that we all know that what institutionalism is and how it operates. As for, so I found very interesting your comment about sociological versus rational choice institutionalism, and how you saw or you didn't see features of them in the paper. So there's a difference between the mechanisms of establishment of the network. So it is a network based on voluntary cooperation. So it's not based it's not the outcome of this network, of this mutual learning, is not compulsory. So member states do not have to take it into account necessarily. They can just ignore it potentially. But the sociological, so as you said, it's sociological, that if they internalize the norms, the best practices exchanged during meetings, then they can apply them in their member states. But there are also elements of rational choice, because rational, for example, when the European Commission members provide opportunities, provide the characteristic, the description of funding opportunities, they give an opportunity to the members of the network to respond to them strategically and draft, for example, calls for projects that are that comply with the rules, because there are rules for giving funds, for the EU to give funds to public organizations, even private organizations. So that's why I mentioned rational choice. It's not rational choice in the at the moment of establishing the network, but it's rational choice inside, and that's what was interesting to see from the research. So by analyzing in depth the meeting minutes, it was possible to identify what was happening inside the network. Well, the reference to epistemic communities, it was just a different framing. When I was writing it, I thought that it could be confusing, as you said, and it's just a different framing of the network. It's epistemic in that they're all experts in their. They were all experts in their field of interest, and so that's why I mentioned that it was just a different perspective, and I can see if it creates some confusion. As for the policy cycle, I totally agree with you. It's a simplifying structure, but it's a heuristic. So we have heuristics in public policy. We have lots of heuristics. We have carrot, sticks, and sermons. We have agenda setting for formulation, adoption, decision making, and for implementation and evaluation. So the public policy cycle. We have many heuristics which are useful to have a benchmark, have an analytical frame to use for our analysis. That doesn't mean that I believe that public policy making actually happens in such a linear way. It doesn't, or circular. It doesn't, definitely doesn't. And I also say it, I also write it in my paper, that it's inevitably artificial as a heuristic. So yeah, I totally agree with you, but we have to start from some analytical benchmark. And as for the decision making, you missed the decision making phase because it was, as I said, I called it adoption. And I mentioned it together with the formulation phase for the reasons that I explained during the presentation. So at this stage, we cannot really see how this is going to impact the actual adoption, the actual decision making of member states. So as I said, I identify the potential impact of transnational networks based more on the activities of the network than on what the people will do later. I will certainly look into the broader plethora of these networks, because I agree with you, it's very, very interesting and maybe under-researched in some regards topic. And I will also look into the life cycle of networks. I believe it's very, very important. I think I have answered all of your comments, and I will move on to Natalia's comments. As for building capacity, it's a very interesting, yours is a very interesting view, because it assumes that building capacity can be both a goal and a means, and it is. But well, capacity building wasn't a goal of this specific network that I analyzed. It was more the goal of the European Social Fund in general, which funds this network, but it also funds other activities. So the goal of this network was more mutual learning. But even in that case, it's artificial to separate mutual learning and capacity building, because you can mutually learn how to build capacity. I don't know if you, yeah, I do agree with you. And it can also be seen as, it can be seen as a goal, but it can also be seen as probably unachieved by this network, but it's questionable whether it was the actual goal of the network itself. And as a means, it can be seen as a means, because if we don't have capacity, institutional capacity, these networks cannot really work very well. And I do agree with you that it would be better done. So I mean, this thing could be analyzed through a comparison of cases. So thank you both, Osmani and Natalia, because I think your comments were really, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. And as we now have 1 hour left and 2 other papers, I will hand over with no further ado to Lionel and co-authors to present their paper on the dissemination and implementation of cultural rights worldwide, from instructional actors to programmatic actors, a comparison of Brazilian, French, and South African cases. So, Lionel, please, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
You can hear me and see the presentation? It's okay? Okay, so thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present this teamwork today. It's obviously a pity not to be able to discuss it in person, as conferences are also made of informal discussion. But I'm going to do my best from France and from my computer. So, first of all, I would like to underline the fact that it's a team research project with nearly 11 researchers, full-time lecturers, and PhD students. So my name is Lionel Arnaud. I'm professor in sociology, but my colleagues are mainly from anthropology, geography. So it's really a kind of interdisciplinary approach. And you may note that there is no political scientist in the team, even though some of us have this kind of training. So the approach I'm going to present here was thought for this conference, in particular of this panel, since the question of public policy transfers was not at the center of our initial thinking. So I think it's important to underline this, because we are here in a kind of inductive approach where the theory is reconstructed from our first results. So first of all, it is important to clarify what we are going to talk about for those who are not familiar with these debates. So when we are talking about cultural rights, so this is the main purpose of this presentation, how this kind of paradigm can be transferred to different countries and cities. So here we refer to the UNESCO Declaration of 2001, which proclaimed the right of individuals to respect their cultural identity and to participate in the cultural life of their choice. So the recognition of cultural rights questions the hegemony of institutional culture, the culture of museum, operas, on theater, fine arts in general. So in this sense, the recognition of cultural rights would be part of a change in national cultural policies, a kind of reorientation of the objectives and conception that underlie them. So such a recognition will constitute a real paradigm crisis, to use the word of Peter Hall. So in other words, the questioning of the cognitive foundation of national cultural policies. So the aims of this research, this team research, is to understand how this new paradigm is implemented locally in culturally segregated cities. So Peter Hall favors here mainly the questioning of the dominant paradigm over the questioning of the actors who are the bearers of new paradigm. So in this research, we turn to the capacity of cultural movements to disseminate the agenda to local authorities. So this is a kind of a from the bottom-up approach. I mean, from the grassroots organization at the local level. And so from this point of view, our approach here is based on the theoretical conceptualization of James Mahoney and Catherine Thelen, who identify 4 categories of actors who bring about change within institutions. So the main group of actors, according to them, are subversive actors, those who bring change from within institutions, and opportunistic actors, those with ambiguous preference, who play on different levels. Mahoney and Thelen place at the heart of their analysis the interaction between actors bringing about change and veto actors. So it should be noted that these actors may be external to the state, such as interest groups or what we call cultural movements, or internal to the states, those, for example, the civil servants. So in all cases, they are programmatic actors in the sense of William Jennings and Patrick Assentoffel. So in other words, they are collective actors structured around an overall program of change in a public policy, and who hold positions of power, enabling them to participate directly in decision making. So more specifically, the 3 elements characterize programmatic actors, according to Jennings and Assentoffel. They share a program of change. Secondly, they are provided with sufficient resources to be able to guide and define the content of public action. And finally, like policy brokers in the advocacy coalition framework, they are part of learning processes connected to their sustainable presence in a field of public action. So in this work, we were interested in the particular role of cultural movements. So in other words, community organizations, cultural centers, self-help organizations, which are positioned outside of publication and which try to influence it. So they can become partners in a context of reconfiguration of relations, especially at the local government. So our hypothesis is then they will therefore contribute to the dissemination of the idea of cultural rights. So to test this hypothesis, we have chosen to compare 3 cities located in 3 different countries on 3 different continents, and which present contrasting situations in terms of the management of cultural diversity: Cape Town in South Africa, Salvador de Bahia in Brazil, and Toulouse in France. So these 3 cities are characterized by high levels of urban segregation, which are racially motivated. Of course, the context, proportions, levels of inequality are very different between these three countries and these three cities. For example, in France, deprived areas are the subject of a particular and massive urban regeneration policy for almost 40 years, when the millions of inhabitants of Cape Town's township continue to live in shacks and shanty towns without access to water and electricity. But in all cases, the inhabitants share the same feeling of marginalization, discrimination, or even abandonment, which they associate with their skin color and their way of life. So here we are trying to compare cultural movements that operate in socially and culturally segregated territories, that involve Afro-descendant population and that intend to fight against racism and discrimination. So as such, these organizations appear to be the main operators of the cultural rights of Black population in these cities. And in this comparative study, we are particularly interested in the strategy of these actors, notably through their repertoire of action and their modes of public or private funding. What is their capacity to make the cultural rights of segregated populations heard? How does their reliance on public funding affect cultural rights, objective, and so on? So let's start to present the result. I don't have a lot of time. So in a communication that focuses on cultural rights, it is important to first present how culture is institutionally constructed and mobilized as a category of public action in each of these three countries we have chosen to compare. And the result of our surveys underline the weight of the national context, of course, and more particularly of the colonial heritage. In the field of cultural policy, France sets a good example because of its long-standing commitments in the art and the omnipresence of a political discourse in favor of fine arts, and the emblematic figure, for example, of André Malraux, the first Minister of Culture. And this approach, which puts forward the fine arts and legitimate culture, and more particularly Western and European culture, has particularly inspired Brazilian and South African cultural policies. Both have taken up the voluntarist approach of cultural democratization. So in other words, the idea that the state must have a role in the dissemination and popularization of a taste for high arts. It's particularly true in South Africa before the end of the apartheid in 1991 and before the end of the dictatorship in Brazil in 1985. But this approach in favor of great culture and in favor of the white and European culture, which tends to minorize popular culture, is still very much in evidence. So there is a kind of cultural heritage, a past dependency in these three countries. Cultural policies reflect the weight of colonial models, and it is therefore important to link the conception of culture in these three countries to the history of European imperialism. However, it would be a mistake to ignore the changes in cultural policy that have taken place in these three countries in favor of cultural diversity in these last 40, 30, or 20 years. It depends on the countries. However, these developments have taken place in a cultural correct form, like a politically correctness form. There is a culturally correct form. For example, in France, the arrival of the left in 1981 constituted a real paradigm shift in favor of cultural democracy. But however, the French state is still quicker to defend cultural diversity outside its borders and for its own cultural industries than on its own soil. For example, in 2014, the law on the new territorial organization of the Republic la nouvelle organisation du territoire, known as the Loi NOTRe, integrated the notion of cultural rights, but without defining it. Some French deputies, some French member of the parliament, fearing that it favors communitarianism or even separatism, to use President Macron's words. And they're afraid that this concept can endanger the one and indivisible character of the French Republic. And in South Africa, the notion of cultural rights is not given much attention, even though the country has been engaged in a policy of recognizing its cultural diversity since the end of apartheid, including, for example, 12 official languages. But actually, the cultural diversity is, like in France, mainly focused on the economical development, with little attention to the cultural emergence present in the township. And Brazil, cultural rights are officially embodied in policies such as Cultural Viva program on Pontos de Cultura, sorry for my accent. In the first case, they are aimed at cultural development in the peripheries. In the second, they aim at staging Afro-culture in order to integrate it into the tourist agenda. And the two programs tend to associate cultural diversity with market logics, like in South Africa and like in France. So, what is the impact of cultural movements in terms of this capacity to transfer cultural rights paradigm into local government policies? All six organizations share a set of characteristics, in particular, and it is very important, that they were created in disadvantaged neighborhoods by Afro-descendant leaders, and that the vast majority of their members are then Afro-descendants. As such, they directly link their cultural action to the urban question, or more generally, to the right to have rights. In other words, they do not dissociate culture from the rest of social life, which corresponds to the orientation of cultural rights. Cultural right is a way of life, is to encourage and to valorize and to support the way of life, a diversity of way of life, and not a diversity of arts. So from this point of view, although they do not always refer to international texts or even to the term cultural rights, their action aims to decompartmentalize culture and to modify the referential of public policies on culture. So following our first surveys, which unfortunately were slowed down or even stopped by the health crisis, along with most of the activities of the organizations that we are studying, I have tried here to model the positioning of each of these cultural movements. So this presentation differs somewhat from the paper I sent you, with the idea of grasping as best as possible the capacity to transfer a new way of making cultural policies to local and national institutions. So a first approach can be qualified as functional, in the sense that in the manner of the symbiotic actors identified by Mahoney and Thelen, the actor as Delarte and Guga Stebe Cultural Center, for example, try to develop, to use local government policies for their own purpose. This is particularly the case of in Toulouse with the Delarte organization, which intends to promote the cultural rights of the inhabitants of disadvantaged neighborhoods of Toulouse, but in the terms of urban policies, which concentrates resources in this area, both by emphasizing citizenship, integration, participation. So the notion of cultural right is not relayed by the local public authorities, which continues to be wary of it, but this association nevertheless manages to put it into practice. And in Cape Town, the Guga Cultural Center is placed under the responsibility of the City Council through its Department of Arts and Culture. So it's completely connected with the City Council policy. The second approach that we identified is, so to speak, the opposite, since it operates away from the public authorities with private funds, like the Kazakh Cultural Reggae in Salvador or the KZAC in Cape Town. So the characteristic of this initiative is that they rely almost entirely on the energy, on the time, and often family resources of their initiators, like the Kazakh Cultural, who was funded by a reggae enthusiast, Afro-descendant and nurse at the Salvador de Bahia Public Hospital, with their own resources. And in Cape Town, the Kailisha Art School and Rehabilitation Center, so KZRC, is a small theater made of tin and wood, built with the means at hand in the midst of other informal settlements in one of the largest townships in South Africa. So generally speaking, they are self-financed, and the D system is still necessary, if not indispensable, for the township inhabitants to be able to develop their cultural activities. And the third and final approach we have identified is a counter-power approach. For example, Tactique Collective in Toulouse, which aims to revitalize the culture and memories of the French population of immigrant origin. So Tactique Collective action was for a long time in direct political opposition with the municipality, with the City Council of Toulouse. And some members did not hesitate to submit a political list to the 2001 municipal election, the list Motivé, which means motivated, which obtained 12% of the votes, and which allied itself with the left in the second round. So despite their defeat, Les Motivés got 4 councillors in the City Council of Toulouse from 2001 to 2008. It has thus benefited from a certain institutional recognition. And here the political commitment has enabled the movement to gain respect, and above all, to develop an autonomy of action in relation to municipal power, which allows this organization to develop its own agenda in favor of cultural rights. So after this attempt at modeling, which remains very provisional and therefore needs to be enriched and refined in the next few months, we hope, what are the first conclusions we can present? First, the research project we are currently conducting shows that at both on national and local levels, change is largely part of a logic exogenous to public action, which is directly linked to the cultural movement's capacity for action and influence. It's not very surprising. We were focused on non-state organization. But we didn't identify any actors who, within local institutions, carry the issue of cultural rights, except maybe in Toulouse, a representative of the Ministry of Culture, which contributed for 5 years to support certain some cultural organization. But anyway, when they exist, these subversive actors doesn't influence pretty much the policy, the public policy system. They apprehend community culture more in the framework of social cohesion or economical development policies than in the framework of a valorization as such of the creativity of individual groups and society under the theme of the UNESCO Convention of 2001. So they are not subversive actors, they are not inside the institution. And the secondary aspect of our results is that this action of this organization concerns secondary aspect of institutional belief system. They never modify the set of strategy on political demands. They don't influence the normative values which is hegemonic at the national and local level. And this limitation can be explained less by the power of veto actors as such, but the results tend to show that it's more the past dependency, the colonial past, and the institutionalized social and spatial segregation, which is the main obstacle for political transfer. So the change, if there is a change, is more a kind of a sedimentation, which introduce new rules in accordance with the interest of the group, alongside and not against those already in place. In return, local governments are slowly and partially modifying their belief system in order to incorporate the expectation of some association. But it's important to show that in Cape Town, in Salvador de Bahia, or in Toulouse, the belief system on the public authorities on one side, and the cultural movements on the other side, remain very, very different if we consider that the priority given to the economy, tourism, security, far outweighs the right of Black population to be treated fairly and equitably. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Lionel, for this very interesting presentation. I read your paper and liked a lot what your topic of research. And I think it's I'm going to be very straight to the point because we don't have much time as we have another presentation still in this session. So I think you were very ambitious to compare 3 cities, 2 cities from the global south and 1 city from the global north. And of course, you have funding, you have a team to do this, which is very, very nice. So I think this is a very, very interesting initiative. I also found out that it was very great to see the dimension of culture in policy transfer, which is as a loose topic in our discussion. We don't have much of these discussions. One of the persons that the scholars that have been conducting this type of reflection is Giulia Romano. She's an Italian researcher based in Germany, and she just wrote a chapter on this topic, which is going to be published soon in the Handbook of Policy Transfer, Diffusion, and Circulation. So this might be a tip for you to include in your references or have a look. And in spite of you dealing with the diffusion of cultural rights, there is still missing this discussion about the relationship between transfer and the local culture in terms of the adaptations, the obstacles that culture can pose to policy transfers, as well as the dimension of translations, which would be a very interesting element to observe in your paper. Another element that I found very positive was the dimension of civil society organizations. As public policy analysts, as you know, are more focused on understanding the role of governments and governmental and the international organizations in this type of processes. And it's very interesting to have a discussion on civil society organizations in policy transfer. So I found that very interesting from your work. And I will start my first observation here. which is something that I missed a little bit in your paper. And of course, maybe it's not the scope of your paper, or maybe you're going to do this in another opportunity. But I found that it would really be interesting for us to be able to see this interaction, the same thing as I mentioned in the paper of Anna, the interaction between civil society organizations and the state. So you mentioned their program for change, they change their resources, the policy learning, but it would be really interesting to see when they meet, how they interact, what are the episodes, something that Mahoney and Talon, which are the authors you're using, discuss, are also these moments of critical junctures for policy change. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about this interaction between civil society and the state, and episodes of change, or of the important episodes in the story of setting this cultural policies on the agenda, or the challenges they faced with this. So this is my first observation. I'm going to make another observation very fast, because we don't have much time, and we still have a RISE presentation. Something that and I think it's very interesting, as I mentioned previously, but I was having a hard time getting into the justification of the choice of your cases. As when I saw, okay, Brazil, South Africa, Salvador, and Cape Town, I thought as kind of more natural comparisons. But when I saw Toulouse, I felt this was a little bit strange, because the context and the history and the demographics and the fights for rights and respect and so on are completely different. So I missed a little bit of the justification. Why did you put this together in your comparison, in your study? Was it just to have a French case, or there is something stronger that you are proposing in your work? So I really wanted to hear this explanation. And also something that is very important in your work is the dimension of colonization, if I'm not wrong. And I think that these three cases that you have chosen have suffered from different types of colonization, and yeah, so I thought this was the colonial legacy is what you mentioned in the paper. So these are my comments. I wanted to say that in your presentation now, when you outlined the three cases, it was much clearer to me regarding to the paper, when you just put the program for the program for change, resources, and policy learning in the three different cases. It was much clearer than the paper. I think you would benefit in a further version of the paper to put a table or something and follow this in your narrative. So these are my comments. I have other minor comments, but we can, if you want, we can discuss this in another time, or by Skype. I'll be happy to chat with you more. But we have another presentation, so I'll keep my comments here. So thank you very much. Maybe Natalia could, I will hand over to Natalia now.
I thank very much, Osmani. Thank you very much, Lionel. It was a very exciting project. It is actually, yeah. But unfortunately, we won't have enough time to you to reply to Osmani's comments. But in offline, we can do it properly. And I would like to invite Arai Ilyasova, sorry for my pronunciation, to present her paper, and then we finish with the final comments and discussions as well regarding to the whole session. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for organizing the conference at these difficult times. This is my actually first time in this platform, so I hope I will manage to do my presentation online, but thank you very much for your assistance. Thanks a lot again for the opportunity to share and discuss my study. So actually, this is a part of the bigger project, and I would like to talk about the capacity to policy transfer and the role of the individuals in post-communist countries, and case from Kazakhstan. Actually, I would like to focus on the actors involved in the policy transfer process at different levels. And I think the policy transfer, it will be a useful a theoretical framework, especially in order to use the case of the Bologna process in Kazakhstan. As we know that policy transfer is based on interpersonal and inter-organizational interaction in decision-making, coupled with common connections such as culture, rules, behavior, and values. Next slide, please. Okay, the topic is about the higher education reforms in Kazakhstan from 1991 to 2016, and Kazakhstan joined the Bologna process officially in 2010, but findings showed that Kazakhstan prepared and started to use the Bologna process and Bologna principles before the official joining. So actually, Kazakhstan is the first Central Asian country that joined the process and signed the declaration. The next slide, please. So the research questions are to identify actors involved in the policy transfer process, to explore the role of individuals in policy making, and to apply empirical data from the intrinsic case study. And I would like to mention that why it is important to say about the educational reforms. Of course, Kazakhstan, the development of the education system was the priority and is the priority for Kazakhstan. And a lot of investment are putting to this sector. That's why this is a case of this study. Next, please. Right, the research questions are who is involved in the policy transfer process in Kazakhstan, and who and how influenced the decision to join the Bologna process. Because I will give some background information, because Kazakhstan actually started to join the process and initiated different proposals to the Bologna experts in order to join, but it was rejected, and in 2010 Kazakhstan joined officially the process. So the next slide, please. Why policy transfer in Kazakhstan? I asked this question because I think in order to understand why policy transfer is useful for the Kazakhstan, or even in post-communist and post-Soviet countries as a general theory or heuristic device, because Kazakhstan is a post-communist country, and also it was unrecognized in the Western democracies after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in order to increase the recognizability of the country, Kazakhstan initiated different projects, and also took part actively in a different international organization. And one of the example was the chairmanship of the Kazakhstan in OSCE in 2010, which provided a positive image of the country. And also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the head of the state did a lot of initiatives, and they also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs played a key role, also significant role in developing the different strategic documents, for example, Path to Europe, which is also that programs also influence to the decision to integrate with Europe and the West countries. Also, Kazakhstan conducted different a multi-vector international policy, which since gaining the independence in 1991. And it is important to mention that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was a very extreme social disorder and economic instability in the country. And in order to change and draft policy, makers tried to cope with external pressures, which was globalization and also integration, international integration processes. Why I started to explore educational system, because in order to modernize educational trainings for specialists and researchers, also Kazakhstan wanted to increase the quality and competitiveness of higher education in general, and also wanted to enhance the recognition of local researchers and faculty abroad. So that's why Kazakhstan needed, it was like a necessary step to join different alliances and be part of the international community, especially in education sector. Next slide, please. Why policy transfer are used in this study? Because first of all, as we know that policy transfer is a broad notion which consists of covers various concepts such as policy learning, policy diffusion, policy capacity. And I argue that all of these terms and concepts are based, and they are also explore the role of actors from different perspectives. And briefly, I will mention, for example, the instrument and ideas in the context are they might change from one country to another regarding the interests of different actors. So, for example, the role of the president or the state actors, the president office, the prime minister office, or different social state officials from the different ministers are more or less clear. But it is interesting also to explore the importance of the role of non-state actors. In this case, it will be think tanks, consultant firms, and research institutes. And that's why I will focus on those elements such as instruments and ideas and agents or actors. Next slide, please. Policy transfer usually answered different questions such as why policy transfer has been chosen by policymakers, who, what is transferred, how it was transferred. Next slide, please. And there is a different types of policy transfer, such as horizontal transfer. As we know, it's about the bilateral exchange, when the policy transfer suggests a direct exchange between exporting and importing countries. Next slide, please. Vertical transfer, when it's not about only exchange between countries, but also entails transnational transfer networks, and it occurs vertically between countries and international organization or non-state actors. Next slide, please. Why I use international policy transfer? Because international policy transfer focuses on cross-national transfer process, and also it occurs when countries learn directly from each other as a result of interaction within the membership of the international organization. This is a good example of the Bologna process, when 49 countries are members of this process, and they are trying to implement common principles, common programs, and common directions how to improve the education sector in the countries. Next slide, please. Transnational policy transfer, for me, this is like introduced recently, in particular the term of the policy ambassadors. And transnational policy transfer, I think, it occurs globally. But here I would like to mention about the role of individuals as well, because I think organizations, mostly individuals, learn from each other, not organizations. But within being organizations, that's why the role of individuals is a key here in this study. The next slide, please. Policy learning, as I said, is one of the forms of the policy transfer, and I would like to consider here the way where ideas come from and who supports them. This is why I looked for the soft form of policy transfer or knowledge transfer. And here, from the literature, we know different types of knowledge. Next slide, please. Policy diffusion is also one of the form, and here I would consider it as when the technical information on efficient policies is diffused among elites, politicians, and policymakers. Next slide, please. Policy capacity or state capacity, when the state is ready for the policy transfer. And literature on policy capacity has focused on individuals' competencies and capabilities, and as we know that the policymakers' abilities and skills usually impact on the policy choices. That's why this is very crucial to identify as well. Next slide, please. A little bit information about Kazakhstan. As I mentioned, it's a post-communist country that emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union, and centralized administration is being a part of the Soviet Union. Kazakhstan had centralized administration. Actually, it is better to mention. It is important to mention that this. Kazakhstan already had a different organizational structure, norms, and culture, respect to its actors at the local level compared to the West. And that's why in a policy transfer, it is difficult to the post-communist or Soviet country with a different background to transfer Western values, culture, and programs or policies. Next slide, please. Bologna process, a little bit information about the Bologna process. It's an intergovernmental policy for the development of higher education in Europe. It was initiated in 1999 by the Bologna Declaration. So initially it was 29 European countries that signed the Bologna Declaration, and mainly what is important that the Bologna process is a European project which consists of the European values and culture. And the main documents is Magna Charta, Lisbon Convention, and Sorbonne Declaration. And when I started my project and research, I was asked why Central Asia actually signed and initiated this membership in this European project, educational project, being completely different, having completely different background. Next slide, please. A research design, I used the intrinsic single case study, which can be considered as a limitation of this study as well, because policy transfer framework only considered through this case. In Kazakhstan, I used secondary research, literature review, analysis for expert, document analysis, primary research, semi-structured interviews, and document analysis. Next slide, please. Policy transfer approaches. There are, from the literature, we know that there are different approaches, such as ideational approach, process-centered approach, and multi-level approach. Today, in this particular paper, I would like to consider the multi-level approach, in particular European state and national or level or institutional level. Next slide, please. Example of the subcode. So when I did my data analysis, I coded, I used in vivo. It was like a bottom-up approach. So from the interview and the documentary analysis, I didn't mention that it was like 41 semi-structured interviews. Also, next slide, please. Actor, this is more about the findings. So I tried to identify those actors who was involved in the policy transfer process. So elites, state officials, and non-state actors, such as research institute, non-governmental organizations, consultants, and European organizations. I mean, European organization, a lot of initiatives were made by European Commission and European Council. In particular, as an example, I may say the educational programs such as Tempus or Erasmus Mundus that were funded by the European Commission, and also European Council. They launched the program which called the European Political Strategy for Central Asia. And as I mentioned earlier, that Kazakhstan tried several times and attempted to join the Bologna process before 2010, but the application was rejected. But actually, after this EU Political Strategy for Central Asia, which was in 2007, after that, the Bologna process experts visited twice Kazakhstan, and they had some interest on this region. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just a quote from the empirical data when the German member of the German parliament said that the EU is pleased to get closer to the door of Central Asia because Central Asia is close to our home. It borders with Europe and feels part of Europe. In addition, all 5 Central Asian countries are members of the OSCE. Hence, our interest is to ensure that Central Asia is a peaceful and stable region. Next slide, please. The role of individuals in Kazakhstan, I also give some empirical data when I interviewed experts. They mentioned that the role of the individuals in Kazakhstan, or in particular elites, is very crucial because the decision depends on who is responsible for this education sector. For example, it was Minister Tymbayev. As you know, policies in Kazakhstan very much depend on individuals. So if I wouldn't have been for Tymbayev, but for another minister, a different decision would have been taken. And another quote as well. So at the end, I try to be very short and briefly. Okay, so the findings are that national level and institutional level actors are equally were involved in the decision-making process, in particular in this case, and also usually in post-communist countries it is can be seen that the decisions are all top-down, but actually in this case of the Bologna process, it was shown that the decision was from the bottom up as well, because universities initiated and persuaded the Minister of the Education to make decision at the national level. Thank you very much.
Hi, all right. Thank you very much for your presentation. Sorry to have to rush all of you because of the time, but I think I have 8 minutes to make some brief comments. Maybe we can chat later offline if you want. But I found very interesting your topic, and actually, maybe I can make my suggestions and comments in 2 different points. The first one is related again to capacities. For me, it's a very interesting account on how pre-existing and the new capacities interact. So what I'm talking about is that maybe if you is interested in developing more this capacity debate in looking at the transfer process, you can look in your case in the speed and the interferences of capacity. If you understand that we have different dimensions and different levels and capacity from different parts, I mean, we have capacity from the who is receiving the transfer or the transferee as well capacities, we can think about how these whole range interact in terms of what kind of structural conditions, skills, abilities existed in the territory before the transfer process starts, and what kind of interferences this kind of pre-existing capacities brings to the transfer process. The new capacities as well can give us a lot of to debate in terms of the speed that they are necessary to be developed. They are not usually in the same speed, and the dynamics within them can produce a different result. So to call attention to this kind of dynamics and process will be very interesting if you're looking at your data. And another point, the second point that I believe that was very interesting in my reading, was actually not only the role of the actors, but also the individuals, but the role of tools. And in the sense, I make some comparison to what happened in countries like Brazil as well, as how, like you've mentioned about the Magna chart, is an inductive factor, an inductive tool to make the actors to engage with a kind of a normative view on what they are supposed to do. So I believe that you can also call attention to the aspects of how this kind of tools, this kind of instruments can was responsible for the results of the whole process. And finally, just some brief comments on the structure of your paper. Maybe I would suggest that you organize in more clearly ways the 3 first parts, introduction, methodology, and the literature. I believe in some parts they are a little bit mixed. So if you separate them more precisely, it will be also clear how they interact between each other. And also the main subject, that is the BP, is that it's working, that you are looking at the educational system in Kazakhstan. It's something that you should announce right in the beginning of the paper, in the introduction, because at least for who is not very aware of even the BP or even the Kazakhstan context, we started to try to understand, we start to understand that just more in the middle of the paper. So if you bring it to the beginning, it will be easier for us to engage. You use a lot of acronyms, and for us who are used to, is quite straightforward, but for other readers, maybe it will be easier if you give the whole explanation of what acronyms come right in the beginning as well. And finally, I believe there are some sentences in the paper that could be a little bit more developed. Again, maybe looking at the capacity discussion, and some that I thought maybe I can send you later the paper in comments so you can develop more. But I believe it was a very interesting paper, and I would appreciate very much to keep discussing with you. Unfortunately, again, I see here from my screen that we have only 3 minutes left. So I will have to leave for our debate in other spaces. And we'd like to invite Osmani and I for you all to join us in the next section that we start in half an hour. And I'm particularly very, very happy to have been able to engage with you with this very profitable and fruitful collaboration. Thank you very much for all of you. Thank you.